Okay, so after the opening, when we get to the early middle game, remember the opening here is complete when one or both sides have their rooks connected. Okay, so we move to the early middle game. We have fought for the center, we have developed minor pieces, we have moved our queen, and we have connected our rooks. So all the pieces are ready to engage with the opponent's forces. So in this phase, in the early middle game, we have to find an object of attack, and we have to attack that object with our pieces. Okay, the objects of attack are weaknesses in the opponent's position, which are pawns, squares, and pieces. And regarding pawns, it is backward pawns, it is double pawns, and isolated pawns that we attack. Regarding squares, it is all squares in front of weak pawns. And regarding pieces, it is all undefended pieces and also higher valued pieces that can be attacked by lower valued pieces. So this is what happens in the early middle game. Immediately after that, if this is not there, there are no weak pawns to attack, there are no weak squares, and there are no undefended pieces or higher valued pieces that we can attack with our lower valued pieces. Then we start using principles of strategy to put pressure on the opponent's position. So we've got the principle of maximum activity. We also can use the principle of neutralization. We can use the principle of limitation. We can use the principle of least active piece. These principles we use to put pressure on the opponent's position. In this phase, there are features that we can bring about or exploit. Okay, so these features are the element of material imbalance. We can create a difference in material, or we can pressure the position. We can increase the activity of our position using the element of pieces placement, or we can increase the activity of our position by taking control of open lines, or we can increase the activity of our position by taking control on exploiting color complexes. So this we can use strategy, or we can put pressure on the opponent's position by attacking their pawn structure, or by attacking the king if it's not safe. So sometimes in that phase we use tactics to gain a strategic goal, or we can use strategy to achieve a superior attacking force in tactical positions. Okay, so now I'll explain all this in detail. Alright, now we come to positional elements. Positional elements are features that are present in a chess position and are of an enduring nature. They last long. They're not like a space advantage which disappears quickly. Okay, so what are these kind of features that we're talking about? There's a positional feature called the element of material imbalance. Okay, this involves, say, a queen versus against two rooks. It could be a rook versus two minor pieces, a knight and a bishop. It could be a bishop like this versus three pawns. It could be a knight versus a bishop. In such case, the side with a bishop would open up the position so that the bishop could have more squares under its control than a knight. Or if you've got a knight versus a bishop, you would close the position if you've got a knight so that the knight has better chances against a bishop. It can also be element of pieces placement. With the element of pieces placement, the players want to improve the position of their pieces by comparing the activity of their pieces to the activity of the opponent's pieces. Okay? It could also be the element of pawn structure. Okay? So players improve their position by identifying and exploiting the advantages or disadvantages that the pawn structure offers. Another element is the element of open lines. Players can improve the activity of their position by controlling or fighting for control of open lines or files that lead into the opponent's position. Then the other is the element of central control. Now this is focusing on the secondary center. We know the primary center, this is the secondary center. Okay, so on the element of central control, players can improve the activity of their pieces by fighting for more squares in the secondary center, which comprises of 16 squares, like this. The other element is the element of color complex. And on the element of color complex, players improve the position of their pieces by controlling and taking over control of a group of squares of the same color which are weak in the opponent's position that can be used to get to the opponent's king. For example, capturing a light square bishop and leaving the opponent's light squares around the king weak. Also, there is the element of king safety. Okay, players focus on the element of king safety by counting how many of their pieces are attacking versus how many of the opponent's pieces are defending. Any point in chess, if the number of attackers is more than the number of defenders, then the attack will be successful.
Yes.
So when we look at attacking pieces, any piece that can put the opponent's king in check in 2 moves counts as an attacking piece. And any piece, like these ones, minor pieces, that are around the king and can defend the king, can exchange these attackers, count as defenders. Look at major pieces like rooks and queens, do not count as defenders. They're not good at defenders. They are
Good.
for attacking. Now let's go to these elements in detail. In order to demonstrate the element of material imbalance, here's an example between a game that was played in 2006 between Grandmaster Thomas Luther versus Grandmaster Janusz Kochelski. Okay. Now we catch up with the action after Black's 17th move, pawn to d5. Alright. Now we look at our principles of elements, or principles of strategy. We want to place our pieces on their most forward squares. First, which phase of the game are we in? We are in the middle game. In the early middle game, we find an object of attack and attack that object with our pieces. Then after that, we attack pawns. These objects can be pawns, squares, or pieces. After that, we attack any undefended pieces on the 5th or 6th rank, or sometimes on the 7th rank. Okay. After the early middle game, these targets are not there. What do? We focus on strategy, increasing the activity of our pieces and at the same time reducing the activity of the opponent's pieces. And here we want to create or exploit positional elements, features that appear and that are of a long-lasting nature. So here we look at our pieces, and using the principle of maximum activity, you want to see if you can place any of your pieces on their most forward squares. Okay, so you look at the queen, the strongest piece. You can place it on a5, you can place it on d5, d4, you can place it on e3. If you place it on a5, their queen will capture it. If you place it on d4, this pawn will be advanced. It will attack these two, the queen and the bishop, and you lose material. If you place it on e3, they will attack your bishop and further advance. It's not good. If you place your bishop on d3, you just lose it to the knight. This bishop, it cannot move to any forward square. b8 is attacked, c7 is attacked, d6 is attacked, e5 is attacked. This one cannot be improved. Yeah. So the only piece that you can improve is the knight. It can go to h5 or f5. So what happens if you play there? Because first you have to identify how many of your pieces you can place on their most forward squares, and you realize it's the knight. Okay, now what happens, you calculate to see what happens if you play that move. So if knight to f5, as was played in the game, if the opponent captures the knight. Now we're calculating to see what happens. If the opponent captures the knight, then you can capture the d pawn, attacking this bishop. If they capture back, you capture queen. You capture with your queen and put their king in check. They take, you take, and you've created an imbalance. They've got a bishop and knight. You've got two bishops. So you've created an imbalance that you can work on. Bishops do more work. You open up the position, bishops will control more squares than your opponent's pieces. So this, you've created an imbalance which will give you a long-lasting advantage. If they don't do this, if they don't capture, they move backwards. They could move to b7 or a8. What do? You advance, and you still, this bishop is lost. And you still create an imbalance of two bishops versus bishop and knight. It's a long-term advantage. So in the game, after knight f5, rook to e8 was played, knight take, e7 with check becomes a tactical position, queen take, and then you've created that imbalance. Opponent has bishop and knight, and you've got two bishops. So now pawn to e5, gaining more space in the center and fixing these pawns on light squares so that this bishop is not too active. It's like a bad bishop. If they capture, they isolate these two pawns on their own. So they'll have this pawn clump, they'll have this pawn clump, they'll have this pawn clump. So they'll have 3 pawn islands, whereas you'll have 1 and 2. So you'll have a superior pawn structure and you'll have superior minor pieces. So they don't capture, they advance. Alright, so this is an example to show you how you can create and exploit and try to exploit a material imbalance. Alright, now we come to the example of pieces placement. Okay, we catch up with the action in a game that was played in 2011 between Grandmasters Evgeny Postny versus Grandmaster Fabiano Caruana. This game was played in the European Championship. And here it's a position after Black's 35th move, rook to b7, here, attacking the queen. So first, which phase of the game are we in? That's the first question. Anytime, you have to understand which phase of the game am I in. Opening is complete when one or both sides connect rooks. Okay, so rooks.
End game. Yeah. Middle game.
We're in the middle game. End game starts when we exchange material equivalent to the value of a queen. So 9 points. So it could be 3 minor pieces. So because there's 2 minor pieces on the board, we're still in the middle game. We have not exchanged material equivalent to the value of the queen. All right. So we are in the middle game. There. But late middle game. All right. So in the late middle game, it's not the early middle game where we attack pawns, pieces, and squares. We're in the late middle game. So we use and we create positional elements, or we exploit positional elements that are there. So now we are focusing on the element of pieces placement. Okay, we want to activate our pieces. We want our pieces to be more active than the opponent's pieces. So we come back. This rook attacks the queen. The queen is in danger. If the queen moves to c2 here, defending the knight, because the queen has to keep an eye on the knight, the queen attacks this knight. So if the queen moves on any square, dark square, then this knight will be lost. So if the queen moves to c2, keeping an eye on the knight, this rook will be played to b2, attacking the queen and gaining more space and more squares under its control. So in order to maintain the defense of this queen, of this knight, the queen has to move to h1 where it's safer and give some squares to the rook. This rook only has 2 squares. The queen is under attack, it doesn't have squares. The bishop is blocked by this pawn and this pawn is not active. So you want to activate all your pieces at the same time. So what do? So you come up with a scheme. A scheme comes before a plan. So schematically thinking, you want your queen out of the way, defending the knight, then you improve your rook and your bishop. And then you've activated all your pieces, the activity of your pieces. You've improved the activity of your pieces. So here, white played queen to b1. Black played rook to b2. But now this move does not come attacking the queen. So it's still it's now white to play. All right. White plays rook to b1. improving the activity of the rook, placing the rook on an open file using the principle of open line, the element of open lines. So this rook threatens, it's a threat again. It threatens rook to d8, check. If the bishop blocks, this rook will take the bishop for free. If the king moves out of danger, this knight can take this pawn with check, and the queens, no one will be defending the queen. So that's the tactic. Rook d1 is a deeper move. It has threats that it harbors. So rook has to be pushed back to d8 to defend against that threat. Pawn to h4. Now we are improving the activity of the bishop. If black doesn't capture, white will simply capture. Black captures and he captures, and also opened up the h file. So black captures, white captures back. The bishop has more squares than it had previously. So here we see the queen slightly improved, the rook is totally been improved, the knight on a central square where it's most active. The bishop is improved. Now we only have maybe to move the queen to f3 and all the pieces will be active. And not to mention that white has an extra pawn. So this is how we use the element of pieces placement. Now we come to the element of pawn structure. Okay. So first, this is from a game that was played between Grandmasters Vladimir Akopian against Grandmaster Alexei Shirov. It was played in the World Cup of 2007. Okay. First, which phase of the game are we in? That's the first thing. Which phase of the game are we in? The opening, the middle game, or the end game?
Middlegame.
We are in the end game. Material equivalent to the value of a queen has been exchanged. 3 minor pieces. Remember, we start with 4 minor pieces. There's only 1 minor piece left. So it means 3 minor pieces have been exchanged. So we are in the ending. In the end game, we evaluate to see which side has the advantage, is playing for a win, and which side is playing to avoid defeat. And we advance our passed pawns to promote them into a new queen, and we attack the opponent's weak pawns. And we activate our pieces according to the numerical struggle. Okay, roughly. So here is an endgame position, and we attack our opponent's weak pawns, and we advance ours to promote them into a new queen. It is black to play. So black, in accordance to the element of pawn structure, instead of rook b8, black could have played queen to a4. So first you look at, when you're attacking in the endgame, do you have a passed pawn that you can advance and promote it into a queen? So the black pawns, there are no passed pawns. This is an example of a passed pawn. It can advance and promote, but it is white's pawn, so black does not have a passed pawn. So black wants to attack the opponent's weak pawns. So you've got double pawns and isolated pawns, and you've got an isolated pawns. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pawn islands. This is an island on its own. 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 So they are all weak, and they need pieces to defend them. Okay. Imagine this. If you've got 10 pieces on the board, and you've got an advantage of a pawn, it's not easy, it's not clear to realize the advantage of that pawn, because your opponent's pieces are active and creating problems. Now imagine from 10 pieces on the board to having just 3 pieces on the board, and you've got an advantage of a pawn. That advantage is clear now, because there are not too many pieces to create threats against your pieces. Exactly. So here, when we're in the endgame, regarding pieces, we activate our pieces in order of their numerical strength. So in order of the numerical strength of pieces, the queen is the strongest piece with 9 points. So you play queen to a4, offering an exchange of queens to reduce the number of pieces that can create problems for you and put pressure on the pawn on c4, plus you limit white's pieces on only 1, 2, 3 ranks, so they don't have space. So this will be the move that you'd suggest, using the principle of pawn structure. But in the game, rook to b8 was played, using the principle of open lines. The element of open lines, the element of open lines is occupying an open line. Okay. Knight to d2. Now, queen to a4. But first, queen a4 I think would have been better. Now queen to a4. Here the rook can defend. Earlier the rook could not. So now rook can defend. Exchange of queens. Okay. Now bishop to a4, attacking the rook. If the rook moves out of, it moves from c2, then this rook will penetrate via b2 and it will be attacking the knight and the pawn. Plus it will be more active. So knight b3. If this bishop captures the knight, then the rook simply pins and white is okay. The bishop cannot move out of the pin because then the rook will be lost. So bishop moves back and attacks the pawn on e4. Knight moves back and defends. Bishop again attacks. Knight back, and then black advances the h4 pawn, h5 pawn with the idea of advancing it to h3 and doubling up these pawns, weakening up the h pawns as well. And I think black ended up winning because of the structural weaknesses in white's camp.
Yeah.
Right. So let's go on to the next element. Alright, after the element of pawn structure, we come to the element of open lines. This game was played in the European Championship in 2004 between Grandmasters Vasily Ivanchuk against Julian Radulski. As you can see, the A file is closed, the B file is closed, the C file is closed, the D file is closed, the E file is closed, the F file is closed, the G file is closed, and only the H file is open. So in order to make progress and to attack the opponent, black's plan is to play bishop to e7 and king g7 and then bring the rooks on the H file. They have to fight for this open file. Or they can simply play king to g7 followed by bishop e7 and then getting their rooks on the H file. First, we have to identify which phase of the game we are in. We are in the... Which phase of the game are we in?
Middle game.
Middle game. We're in the middle game. Alright. And it's a late middle game. We cannot attack pawns or squares or pieces on the 5th and 6th rank. So we focus on positional elements. On this position, what is the main difference? What is the element that we can use to formulate a plan on? It is that open line.
Yeah.
Alright, so after h to g4, it is black to play. Black plays bishop to e7. Okay. White plays knight to b2, most probably bringing a knight closer to the center of the board. This knight is on the edge of the board, bringing it closer so it can have more squares. King to g7, now preparing to bring the rooks on the h file. King to g2, now white realizes black wants to occupy the h file. Rook to h8,
Rook to h1.
rook to h1. But now in this case, if this rook moves, then an exchange of rooks will okay, and it's almost an equal fight. Rook to h4, another rook lift. Now you double rooks, you double their strength. One rook is strong, but two rooks are stronger.
Yeah.
Okay, so rook on h4 attacking this. So you've got 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking this pawn, and defenders 1, 2. So you cannot ignore this point, otherwise you lose material.
Yeah.
Okay, so he has to defend. After defending, now black has 2 rooks on the h file, and this knight cannot move because the rook will be lost. Okay, so this is how, after using the element of open lines, the late Julian Radulski managed to have an advantage and later won against Grandmaster Vasily Ivanchuk. So let's go to the next element. Alright, so now we come to the element of central control. Okay, again, we start with which phase of the game we are in. This game was played between the current world champion, Grandmaster Magnus Carlsen, versus Grandmaster Peter Lego. This game was played in the Pearl Springs chess tournament in 2009 in Nanjing, in China. So we are in the opening. Why? Rooks have not been connected. In the opening, we fight for central control. We develop, we castle, we connect rooks. So we're still in the opening phase. Okay. In the opening, we fight for the primary center. After the primary center, we go to the secondary center. So here, once you can no longer have a pawn on e4 and a pawn on d4, play focuses on the secondary center. You want to have more control of squares in the 16 square complex than your opponent has. Alright, so in this position, after we look at the 16 square complex, okay, and we realize that white's pieces control 6 squares and black's pieces control 16. So what do I mean? So this knight can go to this square 1, this queen can go to this square 2, this bishop 3, 4, 5, this one 6, only 6 squares. Black, the bishop 1, 2, this knight 3, 4, this knight 5, 6. Okay, so bishop 1, 2, this knight 3, 4, 5, this 6, 7, queen 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, almost 17. Okay, about 16, 17. Now, using the element of central control, we see a fight for central squares, this 16 square complex. We still have to develop castle and connect rooks. We're still in that phase. We're still in the opening. Alright, so in the game, white plays knight to c3, developing a piece. We're still in a phase where we develop pieces. So it develops a piece and attacks the queen. So when there's contact between pieces, it's a tactical position. So the queen has to move out of danger. Alright, what to do? Pawn to d5. So pawn to d5 gains space on the queen side. We know after e4 and d4, if any of these two pawns, e5, if you advance e5, you gain a space advantage on the king side. If you advance the d pawn, you gain a space advantage on the queen side. What does this tell us? It tells us that white can bring more pieces to the queen side than black can. So white will focus his play on the queen side, and black will try to focus his play on the king side. Okay, and at the same time, white wants to control more squares in the 16 square complex. This is where the fight is. So white will have an advantage on the queen side and in the center. Pawn to a6. Why is this move played? Remember, territory. This square is covered by the queen. This square is covered by the queen. This square, the queen is there. This, okay. So this square, the square that's not covered is this. Okay, and move back. This square can allow a bishop or a knight to be placed there. So in order to defend from the opponent's pieces getting into your position, black plays pawn to a6. Okay, rook to e1, preparing, just placing a rook in an open file. Once this bishop moves to f3 or d3 or c4 or f1, the rook has control of the whole e file. King to h8. Maybe the idea is to go knight g8 so the knight can have squares on h6 or f6. Rook to c1. Again, after moving the knight, the rook will have total control of the c file and puts pressure on the c7. Pawn bishop to d7. Now, which phase of the game are we in? After bishop d7. The middle game. Why? Because the rooks have been connected. The opening is complete when one or both sides connect rooks. So black has connected rooks. So we're now in the middle game. In the middle game, what do? We find an object of attack and we attack that object with our pieces. So this object of attack can be weaknesses in the opponent's camp, so they can be pawns, squares, or pieces. Regarding pawns, it is pawns backward pawns, double pawns, and isolated pawns. So pawns that need other pieces to defend them. Okay, so this pawn is behind, this pawn is behind. You could attack these with your pieces.
Yeah.
So black, after bishop d7, white plays. Okay, we are in the middle game, and this is what we do. Okay, now white plays bishop to f3 to make sure that this pawn remains a backward pawn. If it's moved, white will take, this one will be in danger. If the bishop captures, the bishop will take, pawn will take, or knight will take, and the queen will simply win a pawn here. So that it discourages moving the c6 pawn. This bishop f3 move, it places a bishop on its most forward square, because h5 is impossible to place. The queen will capture the bishop. g4, the queen will capture the bishop. So the most active square for the bishop is f3, and it opens up the e file for the rook. After bishop f3, rook c8, defending the c7 pawn. Queen b3. Remember, we attack opponents' pawns on the 5th, 6th, or sometimes on the 7th rank. You want to force them, you want to force your opponent's pieces to defend them, or push them so that they create backward pawns, double pawns, or so they create weak pawns. So queen to b3, now rooks are connected, all white's pieces are in play, and is putting pressure on black's position. Okay, b5, this leaves this pawn as a backward pawn. Knight d2, rook total control of the cf file of the c file. The idea is to play knight d4, and this other rook will also have total control of the e file. Queen to h3, trying to create play on the king side, maybe following up with bishop g4 to exchange some pieces so that it's easier to defend. Knight to d4, centralizing a piece, placing the knight on one of those 4 squares where it's most active. The knight has 8 squares under his control mostly once it's there. Bishop g4, trying to exchange pieces, but okay, he refuses. Queen moves back and gains more space with pawn to h4, just pushing black's pieces back and gaining space. Knight g8, maybe with that idea of bringing the knight here, or f6. And after these moves, white's pieces control more squares in the secondary center. The first when we first looked at the position, this are now after 15 moves. When we first looked at the position, now we have got white's pieces controlling 20 squares, and black's pieces that from 9. And now white's pieces from controlling 9 squares, they now control 15 squares, and black pieces from controlling 20 squares earlier, they now control 9 squares. So white has increased the activity of his pieces and totally dominated the secondary center, and he later went on to win the game after 21 more moves. Alright, Max. So we come to the element of color complex, and we catch up with the action in a world championship match of 1985 between former world champions Grandmaster Anatoly Karpov versus Grandmaster Garry Kasparov. This is a position after black's 20th move, rook d to c8. Okay, so now white takes on e6. Black has control of an open file, c5. Okay, so remember, the color complex idea is when a bishop controlling a group of squares is exchanged. For example, here, after noticing that the light squares on the king side, if this bishop is exchanged, they will be weak, and white will be able to move freely along those squares. White exchanged the knight on d4 for the bishop, and for the next 17 moves, white only played in light squares because it could not be challenged. And this game was later called the White Key Symphony because of the white's mastery handling of this position. So knight take, pawn take, and in the next 17 moves, white only played in the light squares. So you see, these squares are weakened. Now pawn to f6. Which phase of the game are we in? First, you must always understand which phase of the game am I in, because then you know what you have to do. Which phase of the game are we in? Opening, middle game, or end game?
This will be end game.
This is the end game. Alright. So we have exchanged 3 minor pieces, so we're in the end game. Alright. So in the end game, we evaluate the position to identify, to determine which side has the advantage and is playing for a win, and which side is playing to avoid a loss. And then we we advance our passed pawns to promote them into a new queen, and we attack our opponent's weak pawns. And then we activate our pieces in order of their numerical strength. Alright, so white plays bishop to g4, putting pressure on e6. It's a backward pawn. It's a weak pawn in the ending. So white cannot advance any of their pawns to promote them into a new queen. So they attack the opponent's weak pawns. So they play bishop g4. Rook to c4. Black is rightly playing along the c file, because with elements with positional elements, the highest one, this the highest on the priority list is the element of material imbalance, followed by the element of pieces placement, followed by the element of pawn structure, followed by the element of open lines, then the element of central control, and the element of color complex. Okay, so black controls the open file, so black is fine. The problem is these weak pawns and the light squares. Pawn to h6, opening up a square, and so that the back rank is not weak. If attacked, the king is able to escape. Queen to c6, tripling pieces on the open c file. And this is called the Alekhine gun, when you've got 2 rooks and a queen on one file. Queen to d3, activating the strongest piece and placing it on the center where it has more squares. King to h8, rook f to d1, pawn to a4, yeah, pawn to b3, just playing on light squares, attacking a rook, forcing it to c3, queen to e2, rook f8. So now black is now moving away from the c file. Black could have exchanged off pieces along the c file, but I'm sure he didn't feel there's any danger to his position. Bishop to h5, placing the piece on its most forward square. Again, it will place on its most forward square. It will guard the c file. The queen will coordinate with the bishop and further put pressure on the light squares. b5, bishop g6, again on its most forward square. Bishop d8, bishop to d3, centralizing the bishop and coordinating the bishop and the queen, attacking the opponent's pawns. So you want your opponent's pawns to move forward. In the endgame, there are 3 types of pawns. Okay, there are isolated pawns, there are double pawns, and there are advanced pawns. So if a pawn is closer to your side of the board, you can easily gang up on it and attack it. So you attack your opponent's pawn so they get closer to your side of the board. Queen to g4, now just focusing on the light squares. Queen has to come back and defend. Pawn to e4. Okay, bishop g4 now is focusing on rendering the central pawns weaker and easily vulnerable to his pieces attacking them. Exchange of pieces. Now the c file is totally neutralized. The advantage that black had on the c file is gone. So pressure on the c file again, trying to create a different an attack on the f file. Queen e2. So we have got the queen and the rook putting pressure on f2. The threat is rook take pawn. If queen takes, then bishop will pin the queen to the king. Not good. So what does he do? he defends. Okay, queen to c3, white realizes they may want to offer an exchange of queens, then there won't be an advantage. So captures pawn. If you offer an exchange, queen will take queen, bishop will take queen, and they'll take another pawn. So you have to respond to the pawn. Now they move the bishop out of danger. If you offer an exchange, they can move out of danger. Again, the queen is placed on one of the four central squares, and it's at its most active. You see, like those squares.
E5.
The queen is on e5. Yeah. After that, queen to f5, and using the control that white has on the light squares and the weakness of the king, white went on to win after a series of moves.
Check.
Now we come to the element of king safety. So here we have to look at how many pieces are attacking the king and how many pieces are defending. Okay. If the number of attackers is more than the number of defenders, then the attack will triumph. So we catch up with the action in this game. The second Soviet Spartak qualification, I think, from 1959. It's a game from Grandmaster Yuri Averbach versus Savarov. There is no first name or second name, just Savarov. Okay. It is after white has played long castling. Which phase of the game are we in? The middle game, right? Why? White has just castled. So automatically you have to know, after when one side or both have connected their rooks, white has just connected rooks. It's move 11. So we're in the middle game, early middle game. Okay. We want to find an object of attack. We want to attack it with our pieces. Alright. So white plays pawn to b5. Because both sides have castled on opposite wings. White has castled on the queen side, black has castled on the king side. So in situations like this, you use a pawn storm. You start pushing your pawns on the other side to go and break open their castle position so you can attack their king. So black plays pawn to b5. White plays knight to e5. Using the principle of maximum activity, is placing a knight on its most forward square. It's one of those important central squares, and he attacks a pawn on c6. Remember, in the middle game, we attack the opponent's pawns on the 5th and 6th rank. That cannot be defended. There's a backward pawn here, so it forces pieces to defend it. Activate a knight, gets it closer to the king. Any piece that can get to the king in 2 moves or less is an attacking piece. This knight can go 1, 2, 10, and from here it can go 1, 2, 10. Check. Okay, so it's an attacking piece. Bishop to b7, developing and defending. Pawn to g4, pawn stone, also launching pawns on the king side to go and break open black's castle position. Pawn to a5. Rook to g1, adding another piece into the attack. Pawn to a4. Now contact between pieces. Pawn to g5. Pawn to h5. This is the position that we saw earlier. This one. White has 5 attackers and black has 3 defenders. So what does it mean? It means the attack will win.
White is gonna overpower.
So if you've got more attackers than defenders, you initiate contact. You get to tactics. Checks, captures, threats. Bishop to h7. Check. Knight take bishop. Okay. So white has sacrificed a piece. He's given up a bishop for a pawn to open up the castle position because he's got more attackers than defenders. Alright. Checks, captures, threats. Checks, queen can take here, but then the king simply takes. It doesn't work. So it's only one check. There's no other check. So captures. This knight can take here. It doesn't help. The bishop will simply take. This knight can take here. The king can take, and then maybe we give check with this pawn and advance. But white chose to attack first. Bishop, pawn to g6. Pawn take pawn, bringing another queen into the attack. Now we've got queen, rook, and knights. These bishops are all attacking. Knight f7. So when knights follow each other like this, they count as one defender. So black has 1, two pieces defending the king. Attackers 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are about 4 pieces plus the queen, 5 pieces attacking. Checks, capture, threats. Check. King moves out of danger. Checks, capture, threats. Capture. Knight takes, another threat. Queen is threatening checkmate here. Knight moves out of danger. Threat. Rook is threatening checkmate here. Black has to give up their queen in order to avoid checkmate. Rook take, queen, bishop take, knight check. Checks, capture, threats. That's tactics. King f7, bishop take, rook, bishop take bishop. Rook to e6, check. So if you don't take here, this knight is coming to take this rook. 1, 2, 10. So rook take, bishop take. Queen attacks, rook attacks queen. Queen to e7 is threatening bishop take here. If this knight takes back, this rook will take. This bishop also is in danger. And after queen to e7 here, Savarov resigned. Okay.
Yeah.
So we see how tactics are used. Checks, capture, threats. And this happened because white developed quicker than white. We catch up with the action on move 11, just after white castled. And white had all his minor pieces developed. Black was behind in development. So that's it about the positional elements and how we use them in practical play.